think, Marge. All I need is a title.
The race for the U.S. Senate seat in West Virginia, which is currently held by Democrat Joe Manchin, has gotten heated, with 3 GOP candidates for the position all throwing mud at each other, and with President Trump weighing in on Twitter to throw his support behind 2 of the candidates, while downplaying the chances of the third. U.S. Representative Evan Jenkins is in the lead in this race, according to Real Clear Politics, which puts the lead at 5 points, or 26% of poll respondents. Following him at 21% is State Attorney General Patrick Morrisey, followed by former Massey Coal CEO Don Blankenship at 16%. The 3 had a nationally televised debate on May 1st, covered by Fox News, and it was fairly enlightening, with some mud being thrown from all 3 candidates, who also attempted to show just how supportive of Trump they are, or have been. Here are some of the highlights.
Congressman Jenkins, first to you. You are at the center of the stage tonight because you're leading in our latest Fox News poll in this race. Your opponents on this stage, however, call you a card-carrying member of the political establishment. You voted for the $1.3 trillion spending bill, which conservatives called a bloated betrayal, essentially. And Republicans aligned with Senator Mitch McConnell are spending money to help your campaign. So I guess the question is, how do you convince West Virginia voters that you can drain the swamp if they think you're a part of it?
Well, thank you, Brett, and thank you, Martha, and thank you to each and every one of you who are here this evening. I'm a proud West Virginian. You know, I haven't been up in the swamp very long. I took out a 38-year Democrat incumbent just a couple of years ago. I'm up in Washington actually working with President Trump. I have been fighting the establishment. I've been fighting the swamp. And what a difference an election makes. Look, we're already starting to see West Virginia turning around, working with President Trump, standing up with him. You know, I proudly endorsed President Trump in the May primary 2016, the only one up here on the stage who did that, and have been standing with him each and every day. So we are bringing real results. Yes, we're cutting taxes. Yes, we're reducing regulations. We're making a real difference in West Virginia. In fact, leading the country in a lot of ways, standing up for what we believe as West Virginians.
Congressman, thank you.
I love West Virginia with all the fiber in my being. And that's one of the reasons why when I ran for Attorney General, I knew we needed a change. We had a 20-year incumbent who was wreaking havoc on the state of West Virginia. I knew we need a conservative fighter to go after Obama overreach and give Obama everything he had. Fortunately, I was able to win in court time after time after time against Barack Obama. If anyone raises West Virginia values with me, show me someone who's done more to go after the absolute wretched excess of the Barack Obama era. We went after it. We won the Clean Power Plan, illegal amnesty. We've been fighting for pro-life principles. We're the conservative fighter of anyone standing here tonight.
Mr. Blankenship, you were recently in prison for a year on a conviction in the UBB mine explosion case. You have blamed the Obama Justice Department and that administration's war on coal, but many of these mining families did blame you. Can you blame them if they don't think it's right for you to go from the jail cell to the United States Senate?
I don't think that's the question we need to be asking. I think the question we need to be asking is whether we can prevent Upper Big Branch from happening again. This time it happened because the government cut the air in half, and that work was finished only 8 hours before a mine that had been in existence for 17 years exploded. Basically, the government didn't blame me. They blamed the coal miners for not doing their job, which was terribly untrue. The miners had probably 400 years of experience. They did their job. Had I plea bargained during the trial, I would have been admitting that the miners did not do their job. So I couldn't do that. I faced 30 years in prison for a fake charge, and I beat all 3 of the felonies. They put me in jail because I did not stop the coal miners from telling each other that the inspectors had arrived. That's not a law that's on the books. That's a law that the Obama prosecutors made up in preparation for the trial. And the trial was incredibly violative of a person's human rights to a fair trial. They did things like, in order to comply with the rule that they have to give us the documents they're going to use at trial, they gave us 1.5 million documents and told us that the documents they were going to use were in there somewhere. It's incredible. They sent me to prison for a misdemeanor. I was the only prisoner there that was a misdemeanor. It was clear from the beginning to the end that it was a fake prosecution.
But, sir, what do you say to those who say that you have made it about you? Do you accept any responsibility for the deaths of those 29 minors?
No, I'm accepting the responsibility to do everything I can to keep it from happening again. The government cut the air in half. The job was finished 8 hours before the explosion. There's not much else you can say about it. You have to have an explosive atmosphere, no matter whether you have sharp bits or dull bits or plugged water sprays or no water sprays. You have to have an explosive atmosphere. The way you prevent an explosive atmosphere is a lot of airflow. And these guys begged MSHA, i.e. the government, not to make that change. The government should apologize to them and tell them the truth.
Why didn't you insist they didn't make that change?
Because I was not aware that they were making those changes. When you have 119 coal mines, it's impossible to keep up with what every one of them are doing. The things we need to do is we need to bifurcate MSHA into a regulatory and inspector group, investigative group like NTSB and FAA are in the aviation industry. We use maximum technology in the mines to control the atmosphere. And we also need to have a relief valve when the government's trying to make you do something that you don't want to do, and your engineers are at odds with the government's engineers. They shouldn't be able to dictate what you do.
So as you can see, this is a highly contested race in a state that Donald Trump won because Barack Obama and the Democrats basically threatened the livelihood of basically everyone in the state. You don't threaten to shut down the #1 source of employment in the state and expect to do well there in elections after that. Donald Trump won every county in the state of West Virginia, and he carried the state by 42.2% of the vote. So the fact that all 3 GOP candidates are playing off this, pushing themselves as Trump supporters or Trump backers, is not surprising. Everyone wants to be seen supporting the popular winner. What has made this race interesting is how all 3 of the candidates have gone after each other, with Evan Jenkins calling both Morrissey and Blankenship carpetbaggers, and with both of the other candidates calling each other and Jenkins liberal.
Congressman Jenkins, I got to ask you, I'm from New Jersey. What are New Jersey values and what's wrong with them?
Well, all you have to do is look at his ad when he ran for Congress in New Jersey. Great picture of him, his campaign logo with Jersey. And the ad said, I will stand up and fight anybody who goes against Jersey values. You know what? We need somebody representing our values. You can't change your values just because you change your zip code.
But what are Jersey values as opposed to West Virginia values?
Again, she's from New Jersey.
I'll let you define. We got 2 folks from Jersey here. I'll let you all talk about your Jersey values.
You said there was something wrong with them, so I'm just curious. What's wrong with them?
I'll tell you what. You know what, West Virginia?
Ms. Morrissey, we'll get you in a second.
Yeah. And, I appreciate you being here. You know what? We do welcome outsiders. We love having you here. People need to be coming to West Virginia for the right reasons. Patrick Morrissey grew up in Jersey, made all of his living and his money and his millions of bucks lobbying in Washington, D.C., and then he went back to Jersey to run for Congress, and he did on his Jersey values theme. He came in last place in a Republican primary, then he moved back to Washington, D.C., making more money, and then he came to West Virginia, put his name on the ballot. West Virginians see through that. This is not about shopping for a state for your political career. Candidly, we had that with a very well-heeled Democrat who moved to West Virginia out of the Northeast. Once they set up shop, it's tough to get them out. We welcome outsiders. We love people moving to West Virginia, but we want them coming to West Virginia for the right reasons.
I don't think you're getting an answer on your values.
And I look up here on stage and I can say, I'm the only one on this stage who has always been a conservative. I've been strongly pro-life my entire career. Second Amendment rights. There's a reason why I'm the endorsed West Virginians for Life candidate, the Second Amendment group candidate, the conservative-backed candidate, because people know I have the conservative West Virginia values. If you look at the congressman, he actually has been very liberal. If you go Obamacare, checkbox, he supported. Hillary, he went and rallied for Hillary. Nancy Pelosi, John Kerry, Planned Parenthood spending just a couple weeks ago. Evan, you should be ashamed of yourself for that outrageous vote, killing the unborn.
Mr. Blankenship, let's get you in the mix here. When you're asked about the carpetbagger question, you respond that, a lot of people have houses in different states. But, Mr. Blankenship, isn't it true that you live in Nevada? You pay taxes in Nevada. And, in fact, your probation officer is in Nevada, and yet you're running for U.S. Senate in West Virginia.
Yeah, I pay probably more taxes than anybody on this stage to West Virginia. If it weren't for me, neither of these two guys would be up here. It's funny that that Pat says the only conservative on the stage. Conservatives weren't even popular in West Virginia until I caused them to be conservative by investing about $5 million of my own money. Honesty. I mean, it's funny to hear politicians talk about honesty. I think that's odd. And as far as a voting record, I voted for the unborn when I've given hundreds of thousands of dollars to Right to Life. That's a real vote. Being able to vote or sue on using the state's money or whatever, that's pretty easy to do. It doesn't take any personal sacrifice to do that. I've made a lot of personal sacrifices, if you will, to stop the bond that would have wasted money in West Virginia, to cut your food tax, which has saved all West Virginians a lot of money. Those types of sacrifices where you're a conservative or you take a position that's not popular is what it's going to take to drain the swamp. You can't drain the swamp being like the swamp.
Jenkins attacked Morrissey, saying that his family had benefited from the flood of opiates entering into West Virginia. Morrissey then responded.
Patrick Morrissey and his family lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., Cardinal Health. Cardinal, it's not our state bird, it's the pusher of all these pills. He and his family lobbying firm have made millions and millions in his 18 years as a D.C. lobbyist and Hill staffer. They have flooded our state with these pain pills that have devastated people in West Virginia. If you want to see what the problem is, it is the pill pushers. And Patrick Morrissey has represented those people for years and made millions.
Our first bell of the evening, but Mr. Morrissey.
Well, there Evan goes yet again. He's lies just keeping out. Did your mom ever tell you that we should wash your mouth out with soap with those lies? I'll tell you what. Obviously, not only do people know we didn't work on those issues in the private sector, but no one has done more to go after the opiate epidemic. Suing, going after entities, $78 million in damages from the pharmaceutical companies. Recently, we just went after the DEA because that federal government agency had been blanketing the state. They were rubber stamping the applications coming in, flooding West Virginia with pills. We went after it. We're putting an end to that. Education in the schools, and obviously we're going after treatment as well, because we have to address people's needs in their heads and their hearts. I'll conclude on this note. All of us, including me and my family, we've seen issues with addiction. There's no one here tonight that hasn't felt it. And for someone like Evan Jenkins to cheapen the political dialogue, to say things that are not true, to hide his deep liberal background, I think is very sad.
Mr. Morrissey, I understand what you're saying there, but as Attorney General, you did sue this major pill distributor. But at the very same time, your wife was lobbying for that pill distributor. Is that not a conflict of interest?
No. Look, we have handled everything exactly right, and I think most people around the state would say we've been more effective taking on the opiate epidemic than anyone. I would note when I got into office, there was no substance abuse fighting unit in the state. So we've turned things around. The other point, which is important, you cited it. The statistics from 2007 to 2012, well, look, Joe Manchin was on the watch as governor. He was sleeping at the switch when pills were flooding into our state, and it took me in the AG's office to go after that aggressively.
Blankenship stated that simply having empathy would not solve the problem, but that addressing drug addiction would. He then went on to slam his opponents.
So you have talked tough on opioids.
If it's okay, I'd like to address some of what they said.
You will.
Let me ask you the question, and then you can. In fact, you want to drug test everyone from lawmakers to teachers. What about the other side of this issue? Do you have empathy for addicts?
Well, I don't think empathy is going to fix the problem. I think if we stop the drug abuse, we don't need to have empathy, and that's more important. But let me say again that Patrick said he's the only conservative up here. I've already explained that neither one of them would be up here without me. And both of them are misleading. Patrick Morrissey came to West Virginia in 2012. He's been here 6 years. Drug abuse deaths have gone up 63%, and they're continuing to be on the rise. They're up 500 and some percent since Evan first went to Charleston. They like to talk about endorsements. Most of Patrick Morrissey's endorsements are the same endorsements that Joe Manchin had. You know, conservatives don't go out and take campaign contributions from Planned Parenthood. And conservatives don't accept money from drug companies that are flooding West Virginia with opiates. So I'll leave it with that.
The Trump administration this morning weighed in, with President Trump stating that either Evan Jenkins or Patrick Morrissey would be fine candidates to face Senator Joe Manchin in the November general election. But he said that Blankenship's prison record makes him a sure loser in November should he win the primary. The two frontrunners acknowledged the support from the president and pledged to work with President Trump to support his policies, while Blankenship played down the dismissal of his campaign, saying that he is more Trumpier than Trump, and that he plans to win on May 8th. There are other primaries coming up for voters on May 8th, including races in Ohio, Indiana, and North Carolina. In Ohio, U.S. Congressman Jim Renacci is running against Cleveland businessman Mike Gibbons for the chance to run against incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown. Brown has been pragmatic, and he has credited the president on certain issues, such as the tariff. But President Trump would rather have a Republican in that seat. He will probably have to settle for Brown because neither of the GOP candidates is expected to win the general election in November. In the race for the Indiana U.S. Senate seat, incumbent Joe Donnelly is weak and vulnerable. However, the action right now is on the GOP side, where three candidates are busy slinging mud at each other, in perhaps the nastiest race in this electoral season. U.S. Congressman Todd Rokita opened up the first debate of the season by welcoming businessman Mike Braun to the Republican Party and fellow Congressman Luke Messer back to Indiana. And the rhetoric has only gotten more heated from there.
Let me move to Mr. Braun for a moment. Mr. Braun, you voted for $1 billion tax increase here in Indiana. Can you explain your vote to Hoosiers? And on the spending bill in Congress, who would you have sided with, Mr. Messer or Mr. Rokita?
I think it's a classic case of talking about this very issue. It's what we get with D.C. over the years. This is just one example. What about all the votes to raise the debt ceiling in the past, where you voted for Obama bills and to raise the debt ceiling? I think when you focus on just one thing, you're missing the picture. This has been going on for a long time. This runs deeper. This is systemic in D.C. because of the kinds of folks that are there. In the real world, I'll tell you how it works. When you've got choices you have to make, you do it with limited resources. And when I'm deciding to bring a new product line on or something, I've got to make tough decisions, and it's always trading off one thing against the other, and you find ways to get it done. If you've been there as long as these guys have been there, in this case, I would have held, because I like Rand Paul's description of it. The only way we get things done is Democrats and Republicans hold hands, spending goes up, the debt goes up, and we get into that same merry-go-round year after year. That is not going to change unless you get people in there that get different ways of looking at it. I mean, why in the heck would we want to put people back into a higher level of office when we've had performance like this over the years? I know the people supporting me are just frustrated with it. It's got to have more sanity to the process. And if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to end up in a calamity that would never happen in the real world. So in this case, I think you needed to set an example that you can't do the things that we've done in the past and expect people to believe that you're going to change in the future.
So this politician, this claimed outsider, this politician just didn't answer the question. I said no, Luke said yes, and we still don't know where he stands.
I would not have voted for it.
Thank you.
I would have been with, and you should have gotten that by how I stated it, yes.
In the race, Mike Braun has a 10-point lead over Congressman Rokita, while Messer trails by 13 points. Even though President Trump has stayed away from this race, Politics City believes that Mike Braun will win the primary and go on to beat Joe Donnelly, especially after he expertly handled debate questions like this one on infrastructure.
Mr. Braun.
So, when it comes to infrastructure, I think I know a little bit about it. Built a logistics company that started in southern Indiana, and we travel the roads across this country. It is truly a national problem. I'm proud that here in the state of Indiana, like Luke said, we are the crossroads of America. It's our comparative advantage. If we don't get that right, we're not bringing businesses in here to do business. So we made a bold step. And what I love about President Trump's plan, it's at least acknowledging that they don't have the money to do it all on their own. Whenever you want to get things done, there's a classic conservative principle called skin in the game. If you don't have skin in the game and share the burden, you do what happens in D.C., you spend more of it than you need to, and it costs more. This is modeled largely after what we did in Indiana, community crossings grants, where the state had that same principle in play with cities and counties. It's been an overwhelming success.
Mr. Rokita.
You know, we've been taxed enough already. It's not about skin in the game. You know, and Luke's right. Joe Donnelly must go. And that's why we're here tonight, to pick the right candidate. If you nominate one of these two guys who've raised taxes, Joe Donnelly will be the tax cutter in the race. Is that going to win in Indiana? Absolutely not. You know, $1 billion in increases, Mr. Braun is responsible for, the largest tax increase in Indiana history. It's absolutely ridiculous. Of course, I'm not going to raise the federal gas tax. You shouldn't need to. We did $1 billion, let me finish, Tony. We did $1 billion in our infrastructure bill without raising taxes and without printing the money. And that's Washington, D.C. These guys, the first thing they do to solve any problem, we got to confiscate more of your property. That hurts the working man. The working man and women of this state can barely afford taxes right now. They shouldn't be forced to do any more. I'm looking at this pad of paper. I counted while these guys were talking. There's about 46 pieces of paper here, Tony, on this pad you gave me. That's how many times Mike Braun has raised taxes here in this state. Don't send him against Joe Donnelly.
Mr. Braun, care to respond?
Well, that's a typical politician. Any of those that was in our comprehensive tax bill. And if he wants to say that, and he wants to...
I just did.
If he wants to give that message to Republicans throughout the county, there won't be, throughout the state, there won't be 5% that will agree with him. You cannot solve problems in a catastrophic way. You've got to do it proactively. And when I was on roads and transportation...
By taking more of people's
Mr.
property.
Mr. Rokita, please.
Hang on a second. I want to complete it. So what you're getting here are two guys, especially the one on the end, that'll say or do anything to distort a situation. And it's part of the problem where they have not made the tough decisions to avoid putting yourself into a predicament where it should have been solved long ago. I signed a pledge to never raise a tax at the federal level, and I signed a pledge for term limits. If you got guys like me in there that weren't beholden to people, you'd get some things done, and you wouldn't have to do it with tax increases. You'd be creative.
Luke Messer attempted to refocus attention back onto the Democratic opponent in the November general election.
I started this debate by saying I'm laser focused on Joe Donnelly. That is why we are here tonight. I tell you who most likes this exchange? Joe Donnelly, right? Because the only way Democrats can win in this state is when Republicans are divided and throw stones at each other. We have a story to tell about Joe Donnelly, the truth The fact that this man comes home to Indiana and says that he's a conservative and smiles and waves and goes to Washington and votes with the liberals 85+% of the time. We need to be focused on that story. All the time spent throwing stones is time not spent focused on Joe Donnelly.
As we have seen, the lead up to the May 8th primary has been informative, educational, and let's face it, entertaining. We hope that all 4 of the states holding primary elections will have a huge turnout and that the best candidate will win.